What? Oh no, but so you can use the
It's the same thing.
Like he's a shop.
Oh, it's just yeah. Okay. Like a high. It's not intoxicating. Really thinks in terms of anxiety.
So there's no.
And what's the point? And he's like, it doesn't even work. And he's like, why do you
You could go out more than anything.
I think it's like
Okay, we did this.
You guys,
Really, after we feel such
yesterday was so much nicer.
but when we go,
Wait, what did you just do? How was it?
Mama and Sophie again.
Yeah, like
Yeah, I know. I know. Like, so great.
like she just did everything basically.
No, because they have their speaker wants to get to
But like, was she doing all the points?
yeah, she's good. But they actually I love it. Yeah.
See, this is what I mean by skill. I swear you're skinny. I swear.
No, you're
good luck.
No, Shadi. Noah.
just
It's just because he was tall. No, I swear it doesn't. It's fine. No, he has the training. But like, what sport does he really play? He's one. What sport does he play? I swear I want to do this next year.
oh no.
I swear.
It's so stressful.
That's true. Like, there's no one watching. As long as I don't like to find them. I don't get it. If they make it to the finals, are they supposed to change their thing?
Our finals today or tomorrow? Or are before these?
Why did they make such a long break in the middle?
It starts at 45. Because they finish early. We're supposed to finish at 9. What did you do with recess?
Like the breaks were like 5 minutes for this one. Like, oh my god.
Was anyone else in the room? Yeah. Ooh, Mr. Bolden and their teacher.
Why?
Wait, so it's literally just the judge in your room?
Yeah. So
What is Extemp? Is Extemp the one that
I don't know what it is.
Is it the one that 11 did?
Exactly, yeah.
Or is that impromptu?
Impromptu, I think they make a skit. I think this is because in the building. No. There's. I really don't know. Because all I know is that there's people in the living room because people aren't allowed to know what the idea is. And you're just supposed to make it up.
Yeah.
So it's like 11.
Yeah. It's actually teaching it.
Yeah. I'm doing impromptu finals tomorrow.
Really?
Who else is doing it on Friday? Early. Why did I sign up for Friday at 8 a.m.?
We got 8 hours. It's actually like, and by the way, tomorrow we want to go, like, come here, whoever's coming here. No, Tanya. No, Tanya. I don't know. People are coming, aren't they?
Anyway, yeah.
But, okay, to go to Shams and Bennett after.
I was craving it today, craving.
Actually, how nice.
I swear it'd be so nice.
All of us.
Like I was literally craving because I think they went today.
Really? Oh yeah, probably they went to the cinema. Wait, let me text you.
I know, yeah. Mr. Whitey, what's up,
Oh,
yeah.
Wait, what time did we finish?
And say different, we always drivers get PD on the day that teachers are coming. Yeah, so the direction was,
Did you ever call Snapchat now?
Yeah.
Really? Oh, let's say it.
No.
Yeah, that's true. I feel like
I do?
yeah.
But it's weird.
It's weird, right?
Do you ever?
I think I say I got a snap. No.
Yeah.
I got a
Did you see the
snap.
snap told us?
Yeah. I think I said.
Are you timing for this?
Yeah.
May I please know your name?
Right, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, her name's Roya.
Got that? Over now.
Is it not fair? Is it like a normal thing? No, what the
Thank you.
What did you say?
Would you like me to get inside?
I won't lie.
You were going to say nothing?
I already have provided paper in my hand, so that's enough.
You got me.
Just me.
Hi.
Did you hear anything you just said?
Hi.
Half the people in this channel are deaf.
No, it's your favorite person ever.
I have no idea.
Wait, can you hear now?
Yeah.
How did you hear it?
I can.
Oh, you can?
I don't want to do this.
Is the line good?
The good thing is.
No. You got those.
I've never seen it. I don't like the green one.
Which one is it?
The one like house.
That's so weird, but like, I love it.
I know.
Yes.
So nice. Right, can you go again to that time this year?
Spring break?
Yeah, spring break.
Yes, spring.
Like my mom last
Oh, I
year.
love it. The
Is it still gonna be really?
thing is, when people go there, if we go, we
I don't know. I literally.
But imagine if we could.
I know how fun.
Because they're actually good.
Exactly.
Like, you're like,
My sister, she was my age. She went
No way.
Chat with her friend who's older. I don't think we're not even meet together.
I
It's
don't-
getting out of control. But it's not out on nothing. Like effort.
The thing is, you're gonna look like this when you eat.
Exactly.
Watch out, live stream it very much live.
Because last year, like when I said no one's parents can take this, she's like, okay, it's fine, go. This year since this happens, yeah, this happened, I don't know what's gonna happen. But I'll be like, you know, I'm not stupid, because like after this
No,
happened,
but
I was
actually imagine, but actually imagine if you
I was thinking about something. Like what on earth would I do?
Wait, how would we have gotten it? They would completely alone. Wait, was he there?
No, but Evo's parents were there,
Oh, true.
so that's fine.
And Rudy's is still there.
But they know, like, since this happened, I'm not gonna do anything stupid. Right? I'm so lucky. I wasn't in the mood that day. I was like, what did you say? It was like a shocking, and then I did it. But like, it didn't really happen. It was nothing. No, I don't think I'd let myself even do it.
You literally barely did.
Nothing.
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 And at night, you opened the food and it was
It was
disgusting.
weird, and no one was having fun. And that was weird. This time, the guys, they'd never take us to their houses because they would
I
have this house. And we weren't allowed to go.
so like,
How much nicer is it in the house? And like we go to the beach and then go to someone's house.
no, but even if they do, they know they're fine.
No, but like unless you like to go.
Oh, it's not.
And then we need to go this time and actually make it fun. I'm saying,
Please,
are you yes? But not too much, right?
I won't. No,
Not too much.
I won't.
Are you saying
Max for that. No.
Yeah, that means you need to go home, and that means you have to go to work. Right? I swear to God. Like, I'll probably do. I don't. Yeah.
Will you actually?
I swear.
Okay. Anyways, it was all through them, and then we'll go get ready for them to go here. So tomorrow-
Exactly. I forgot what we have to come.
Exactly. No, we'll be fine.
Yeah.
Yes, I've contacted the instructor. Okay.
What's the holding room? Extemp?
What?
Holding room.
I don't know.
Thank you.
Wait, let me check. Holding room. 327.
327. Okay, thank you.
Hi,
Hi.
how you doing?
Good.
You enjoying the typing?
Yes, I have to time this business.
Yes. And is that not what you were doing last time?
No, they let me time for it.
Oh, okay. Yeah, you should time with this stuff. And are you doing more debate timing? Because were you timing their time, their prep time? You
No,
said you only have 30 seconds, you should do that too. Yeah, so the judge doesn't have to. Like, it was fine. The other judge can sit there and it's- And they're not gonna start until like half hour, like a quarter after, or,
really?
yeah, 30 minutes, to make sure that's right.
I come back at 3:10.
Check every group. Check. Every group. Yep. There's group 3 as suggestion.
Yeah, the months. Yeah, so our first week here is until a quarter after.
Are you going right now? Do you have a timer right now?
Yeah, hi, hey,
Hey, Gina.
but yeah, we don't have the first one. She was just here.
Okay.
I told her we have half an hour before the first
So
meeting.
you're good,
Yeah.
okay.
have the timer?
I do, she's just, we don't, I don't have the first one until quarter after. So she's gonna come back for that.
You don't need to be edited. That's how we. Yeah.
so shocked. It's not for me. She said I was over. It's not the movies either. I feel like I'm already. Laura, I drink. Is this stressful?
Am I allowed to watch?
I don't take time.
Yeah, good. I'll probably do that.
According to a BBC article from the 21st of September, Iran reportedly attacked Saudi Arabia's Aramco facilities and civilian airports. It is also reported on the Economist, also in September. And the tension and conflict occurring between Iran and Saudi Arabia in the broader context of the further instability in the Middle East prompts the question, is the tension between Saudi Arabia and Iran the underlying cause of the current instability in the Middle East? To this question, however, the answer must be that it is not, because of the tensions between Iran and the United States, and because of the Turkey-Syria conflict. So, in order for the tension between Iran and Saudi Arabia to be the underlying cause of the holistic instability happening in the Middle East, it would have to be significant and all the other issues would have to revolve around it. However, it is mostly the tension between Iran and the United States that has caused a butterfly effect of conflict and instability in the Middle East. According to a foreign policy article published on September 10th, the strikes on Saudi from Iran was their own version of maximum pressure, as despite complying with the regulations and restrictions applied on them by the UN, the US applied a maximum pressure policy which is seriously harming the economy as unemployment is going through the roof and people are struggling to buy enough to eat and the prices of medicine is also becoming unaffordable. According to an article published on The Economist on October 10th, the projected economy of Iran was meant to increase by 4% before the United States sanctions, and after them, there was a projected decrease of 6%, which really shows how the sanctions have impacted Iran's economy. And in response, in retaliation, they have applied their own maximum pressure policy, attacking the allies of the United States in the Middle East and applying pressure on Europe as well. And they're doing this by creating conflict with Saudi Arabia, which is an ally of the United States. So, yes, the Saudi-Iran conflict is destabilizing the Middle East with further violence occurring. but it is more the tension with the United States and Iran than the tension between Saudi Arabia and Iran. Secondly, there is a number of other conflicts happening in the Middle East that would lead me to say that this tension between Iran and Saudi Arabia is not the underlying cause or the root cause of all of this instability. As we know, there's also the Turkey-Syria conflict as US troops have pulled out of Syria, and as a result of this, there has been lots of violence and conflict between the Kurds and the Turks, and there has been freeing of ISIS soldiers as well in the process, which is doing tremendous amounts to destabilize the region even further. So, to summarize, it is clear that it cannot be said that Iran and Saudi Arabia and their conflict with each other is the underlying cause of destability, of a destabilizing Middle East and the instability within it, because the tension between Iran and Saudi Arabia is mostly down to the tension between the US and Saudi Arabia because of the sanctions applied, between the US and Iran because of the sanctions applied by the United States on Iran. This has significantly impacted their economy and they have been forced to retaliate. And this is where the conflict between Iran and Saudi Arabia mostly comes from. In addition, there are also other conflicts such as the Turkey and Syria conflict, which also comes from tension between the United States and the Middle East and their foreign policy, which is further destabilizing the Middle East. And thus, the conflict between Iran and Saudi Arabia is not the underlying cause of the instability in the Middle East. Do I sit here?
Yeah.
Please.
We can maybe open the door and hopefully we won't have people watching by.
Just a second. Let's do 4:30. 26.
Influences can either be positive and help others, or negative and harm others. I'm here to talk about has Russia become the most influential country in the Middle East? Now, this question could be interpreted in two ways: yes or no. But I think it's both. Yes, Russia does have certain amount of influence in the Middle East, but it might not be the most influential. So my first point, why yes, Russia could be influential, is they play a role in the Middle East, a certain role that can be enough to become the most influential, but isn't that. A quote on September 25th published by Foreign Policy article named "Refusing to talk to Iran is a mistake." Quote states from the Trump administration's point of view, Zarif bested not only Obama's administration but also British, Chinese, French, German, Russian, and European Union diplomats who politicated in the negotiation, participated in the negotiation. Now here we can see that obviously Russia, out of all these countries, had a part to play. They played a part in the negotiation. Now in this negotiation, they could have been on the side of the Middle East and on the opposite side of the Middle East. And this they were to the side of the Middle East, giving them trust to the countries of Middle East. Now relating to my second point, how easily can Russia actually become the most influential country in the Middle East? Now I believe that there is a chance for Russia to become the most influential country in the Middle East. According to a quote, published September 25th by Foreign Policy, article named Trump's Iran policy is a failure. A quote states this approach met with some success as key European government along with Russia and China sided with Iran and worked to keep it compliant with the nuclear agreement. Here we can see that Russia, with these other countries, has played a part with the Middle East, with Iran, giving nuclear weapons, which can have a mass difference in how the country is treated. Now, there is also a side of no, why Russia is not going to be the most influential country in the Middle East. My first point is that who are, or might I say, the first question I would like to ask is who are the other competitors? Who are the other countries that could be the most influential? Now we all know since America's current foreign policy with Turkey that they have lost and they have lost all their trust in the Middle East. According to an article called Trump's compliance to Edgarin Decoy's credibility, U.S. credibility, published on October 8th by Foreign Policy, says states a quote in a partial return the chaos that resulted from a December 2018 phone call between the US and Turkish President. Donald Trump once again announced the pullback of US forces in the northeastern Syria, sending Washington's entire policy establishment into danger. From the scope, we can see that the trust that the U.S. And Trump had in the Middle East has been destroyed, and not many countries in the Middle East would trust them. So they would not be a competitor to Russia. But the competitors that are there are Europe, China, France, and many more. And the real question is how easily can they take a part in being the most influential country in the Middle East? Therefore, I believe that it would be hard for Russia to become the most influential country in the Middle East. And I do think that it can be a yes or no answer. Thank you.
Most people see that the underlying cause of Middle Eastern instability is the clash of its two regional superpowers, Saudi Arabia and Iran. Whilst in excess of 123 million people will be affected by any direct conflict, I believe that it is not evident that tension between Iran and Saudi is the underlying cause of current instability in the Middle East, due to a variety of reasons, such as the intervention of world powers, the situation with Iraq, Lebanon, and the situation in Turkey. A foreign policy article published on the 17th of September in 2019 remarks that the United States Secretary of State specifically accused Iran of the attacks on Saudi Aramco facility. thereby indicating some sort of foreign intervention. Whereas the U.S. program Desert Storm in 1991 led to the involvement of over 540,000 U.S. troops in Saudi. And furthermore, an American drone was shot down by the Iranians and thereby increasing conflict further. The same article remarks that had the United States retaliated, the Iranians might have thought twice about taking a major step and attacking Abu Qir or Khurais. In response to my second point, Al Jazeera an Al Jazeera article published on the 30th of October 2019 remarks that the 2-week protests in Iraq in Lebanon have resulted in the resignation of Hariri, and which has brought about the conflict of young versus old, liberal versus conservative, which is a further cause of instability in the Middle East. Furthermore, BBC article published on the 6th of October 2019 states that deaths in Iraq due to the protests are have approached 100, as the UN calls for an end to quote-unquote senseless loss of life. The UNAMI states that 5 days of deaths and injuries must stop immediately, and thereby have admitted to have reportedly talked about signs of instability in the Middle East due to the situation in Iraq. In response to my third point, a BBC article published on the 17th of October 2019 indicates that further indicates that that the situation in Turkey is very significant, and thereby the BBC puts it as Donald Trump's mixture of threats and locker room banter infuriated Erdogan, which further led to instability in the Middle East, as they put it there. Furthermore, there's worrying tension between the Kurdish people and the Turks, as they use the establishment of the safe zone. Furthermore, The Economist, published on the 17th of October 2019, remarks that since the Treaty of Lausanne, the Kurds have been denied statehood, further contributing to instability in the Middle East. However, everything ultimately boils down to 3 things: oil, corn, and especially traditional territorial ambitions. So thereby putting emphasis on territory and the production of both oil and food. Thus, this is the true underlying cause of instability in the Middle East. Thank you.
To understand what is the cause of the current instability in the Middle East, we must understand what is going on currently between Iran and Saudi Arabia. Iran's goal in its relationship with the United States is to apply maximum pressure, not directly, more so indirectly. During a recent attack made by Houthi rebels on oil facilities in Saudi Arabia, Iranians were quickly to blame for. When the news had broke out, this had affected the global oil supply. According to the BBC on September 21st, the kingdom's defense ministry showed off what is said were the remains of drones and cruise missiles proving Iranians' involvement. When it comes to the question, is the tension between Iran and Saudi Arabia the underlying cause of the current instability in the Middle East? The answer is yes. The U.S. Secretary of State called the strikes an act of war. Although there could be more factors in affecting the stability of the Middle East, for example, what is currently going on in Lebanon, where protests are trying to take down the current Prime Minister Hariri, and the ongoing conflict between Israel and Palestine. With the involvement of the United States in the talk of war, there is no doubt that the current tension between Iran and Saudi Arabia plays a big role in this instability. With the current help the U.S. is providing, Saudi Arabia with troops going to aid in better defense is a crucial moment. As oil has a large importance to the United States, that is why the aftermath of the attack on Saudi Arabia, according to foreign policy, is so important since it depends on how the Trump administration response will indicate whether U.S. Will still consider oil a core interest and whether the United States is truly on its way out of the Middle East. According to foreign policy on September 17th, no one wants war, but it's plausible that the United States retaliated after Iran shot down an American drone. The Iranians might have thought twice about taking a major step like attacking the oil facilities, of course. No policy is risk-free, and the dangers of a wider regional conflict are everywhere. But the Iranians, if they were behind the attacks, are testing the entire rationale for the U.S. investment in the Middle East over the last 7 years. With this in mind, all in all, although there are many conflicts and causes of instability in the Middle East, the conflict with Iran and Saudi Arabia and the U.S. is the main cause of this instability due to a talk of war and the possibility of the U.S. not fighting for the region.
Shall I begin?
Sorry.
Shall I begin?
Yes.
Is the tension between Iran and Saudi Arabia the underlying cause of the current instability in the Middle East? I believe that this is true. My first point is that the price of oil could be heavily affected by the actions of Saudi Arabia and Iran. According to BBC's September 17th article, Saudi oil attacks, drones and missiles from Iran, US. The Middle East is a supplier for many countries of oil, and 20% the oil prices soared 20% at one point, which went for $71.95 for one barrel after the Saudi attacks. However, they have claimed that the market disruption is not as bad as they feared after the Aramco attacks in Saudi Arabia on September 14th. Second of all, Iran supports the Houthis. According to Reuters article published on October 4th, Saudi Arabia considering some form of Yemen ceasefire sources. Yemen, there's a humanitarian disaster, and which the UN has claimed is the biggest in the world, that is happening in Yemen, which is a country in the Middle East. But people in the region are viewing it as a proxy fight between Saudi Arabia and Iran. Saudi Arabian Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman claims that Iran is the problem, not the Houthis. And he also claims that if Iran ceases their support for the Houthis, then it will be better for them. This shows that both countries are willing to damage other territories for the war, as Saudi Arabia and Iran are acting like it's their own territories when it's clearly happening in Yemen. And Yemen is being affected, and a lot of people over there are losing their lives, or their loved ones are losing their lives. My final point, the US government are not doing enough to respect their Middle East policy, which encourages countries like Iran and Saudi Arabia to step in and do the work. Mr. Trump's execution of the US Middle East foreign policy has affected a lot of countries in the Middle East. According to the foreign policy article published on October 24th, Iran is winning the battle for Middle East future. The Major General Qasem Soleimani has claimed that the geopolitical environment is a threat for Iran and is a threat for Yemen. This shows that Iran are clearly doing what they need to do in order for the Middle East to be stable and to get back on their feet after the US's actions, as the United States under Mr. Trump have made it clear that they do not want any involvement and they want to deploy less of their military forces in countries such as Syria and Afghanistan, which has clearly affected the Middle East. In conclusion, Saudi Arabia and Iran are taking all the steps required to save the Middle East, but this currently is causing mass destruction and needs to be stopped in order, especially in Yemen, because Yemen is a humanitarian crisis and it must be stopped. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Good job.
Yeah.
I don't know. I tried to go fast because I got nervous, you know. So I can slow
How
down.
does it work? Like,
We have half an hour to speak.
they give you the topic. And are you allowed to Google anything?
No, we have like data bank. They have their own data bank, we have our data bank.
Did you not have a lot of sources for this? Like, was this a hard topic? That's what I'm asking. Was it a hard topic? Was that why you struggled with it?
I think those sources weren't like very consistent, like it's very inconvenient. And when that happened, you have like BBC and foreign policy each submitting like rants and stuff about how US should or should not step up their efforts. You know?
What? Yeah. We can describe those. Put them in that secret we have. We have all that tiny kind of stuff. Really? Yeah, come.
لا لا خمسة خمسة ضرب نكون خلصوا خمسة